Linguists estimate 6,000 to 7,000 languages are spoken worldwide. And so that sounds like a tremendous amount of languages, tremendous linguistic diversity. But what that actually means is that many, many languages have few numbers of speakers. And in fact, in many countries, as many as 90% or more of the people in that country speak a language at home other than the national or official language of that country. 30 languages, including English, Arabic, Hindi, Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, 30 languages include more than 4 billion people speaking the language. So if there's 7 billion people worldwide and 4 billion people speak 30 languages, that doesn't leave a lot of speakers left for the remaining 6,970 languages. And in fact, more than half of the world's languages are in critical situations for their survival. These languages are endangered. UNESCO has a series of criteria that outline how a language is doing in terms of its survival. And for these languages, if there's no children in the home learning the language, if there are only elderly speakers remaining, those languages are in severely threatened states. It may be they're just vulnerable, and in a few years, a few decades, the speakers will go. But many languages are in a critically endangered situation, which means their very survival is threatened. In fact, every continent in our global world has an endangered language. Endangered languages are found worldwide, and so these critically endangered languages are on every continent. But tiny languages are fighting back for their survival. In Europe, the example of Irish is an amazing story, an inspiring story of language revitalization and reclamation. In the 19th century, as speakers started to realize there were fewer and fewer Irish speakers and English was taking over, they started to do efforts, engage in efforts in order to survive, see that their languages survived. In the Gaeltacht, those are the parts of Ireland where the most numbers of speakers are found, the most dense areas of Irish Gaelic speakers. In the 20th century, we saw things like radio, Irish Gaelic radio emerge, and so new media offered places for speakers to regenerate and revive. The indigenous language Maori, spoken in New Zealand, is the New Zealand indigenous language. And that language has had lots of challenges that it's faced. In the 1970s, the community started to realize that the survival of the language was threatened. And so what happened in the 1980s is that Maori community members sought to recreate that environment where language is best learned, in the home. In the home for child rearing, where parents and grandparents and children engage in daily activities immersed in their language. This is the place where children best learn the language. And so in the 1980s, the Maori created language nests, trying to recreate that environment, which was not possible at that time because the parent generation, the childbearing generation, did not speak the language. And as a consequence, the Maori language nest model has taken over in many communities worldwide, seeking to revive and revitalize their language, use that model. Closer to home in Arlington, Texas, only 3 hours down the road in Ada, Oklahoma, is the Chickasaw Language Revitalization Program. And this program is vigorously engaged in making sure its language survives into the next generation. Chickasaw, at best, has 60 to 65 speakers of the Chickasaw language, and none of them are under the age of 60. So you can see that's a challenging situation for the Chickasaw tribal members. But what the Chickasaw Language Program does is they create lots of opportunities for their citizens to engage and partake in the language. For example, playing cards with the language, allow the grandparents, parents, and children to engage in games and have the language there. If we look to Australia, where there's tremendous diversity in Aboriginal languages, we find an inspiring example of a sleeping language being reawakened. Jack Buckskin, a young Kaurna man, has been instrumental in bringing his language back. With the help of linguist Rob Amory and archival materials in the language, Jack Buckskin learned his language. He teaches his language. And now his little girl speaks the language which she learned in the home. So once again, thanks to Jack Buckskin and his efforts and efforts of others around him, what we see is the Kaurna language again spoken by children. It's not just about language. Tremendous amounts of information is stored and encoded in language. Culture, traditions, lifeways, food, knowledge about the seasons, climate, plants, and animals. In fact, if we stay in Australia, there's a significant oral tradition among a number of different Aboriginal people that there was a time when the sea level was low, and what is now island was then connected land where people could roam. But then the sea levels rose and life changed. And this is something that's found in many Aboriginal traditions, the story of the sea level change. And in fact, there's parallels in Western science for climate change that 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, the water levels rose. The Gwich'in in Alaska are in a part of the world with Arctic climates, and this climate and this environment is rapidly changing. One of the things that they have lived on that's been essential to their survival is the caribou. The caribou plays a strong role in traditional subsistence. And as the weather is changing, as the land is changing, the Gwich'in are rapidly engaged in vigorously documenting what they know about the caribou. They have a rich vocabulary for the parts of the caribou, the anatomy of the caribou. Elders have amazing amounts of traditional knowledge about how the caribou was hunted. Ceremonies involve caribou. So this is a center of the lifeways of the Gwich'in, and they're working to make sure that knowledge is there for future generations, and that knowledge is tied to the language. But it's not just Alaska. If we look to the Dahana Atam in the Sonoran Desert, what we see is a people vigorously engaged in traditional foodways, involved in plant activities. For example, the harvest of the bahidach, the red ripe fruit of the hashan, of the saguaro cactus. People still harvest that fruit. And that fruit's harvest in June is usually a signal that the rains are coming. It's an integral part of the calendar of the Dahana Atam life and traditions. Dahana Atam Community Action is a nonprofit that's engaged in language and cultural revitalization and making sure these traditional ways of harvesting plants, of planting foods, are kept alive. Ceremonies, traditional games, it's all about health and lifeways and finding that wholeness that's involved in the traditional foods, in the traditional activities, the traditional sports. The Atam have some of the highest diabetes rates in the world, and reclaiming that cultural connection can allow them to have a healthier path to the future. It's not just about history, it's about technology. The Cherokee are leaders in digital technology with language. So right now, thanks to localization projects that Cherokee Language Program has with Microsoft, with Apple, and with Google, you can text on your iPhone in Cherokee. The Cherokee have long been leaders in digital language technology. When Sequoyah invented the writing system, the Cherokee syllabary in the 1800s, what you soon saw were printing presses creating a large literature in the Cherokee language and a large written tradition. When the Cherokee were forced out of their traditional lands in the southeast into what was then Indian Territory and became Oklahoma, one of the things that was quick to happen was the reemergence of the printing presses and the emergence of a printed Cherokee literature.
Hanabi okchakase ektowaleksan pachakolite sami manasmentot imalakit into babikate okchakotsot homatsot ite malakin into babikate ektowaleksan pachakoli foka hasifon ayiton imokla tukla ho ayite
At best, 200 speakers by the last count, but probably far fewer. Most of the speakers are in their late 50s or older. We had Janelle Batiste, a speaker in her 30s, who actually was able to speak the language because her parents did not allow them to speak English in the home. We had her here on the UT Arlington campus, and we're able to use technology to help create materials that can be used to teach the language and that have been used in culture and language camps hosted by the Alabama Coushatta Tribe of Texas. Technology also allows people to cross the digital divide, cross the world. On February 21st, we celebrate International Mother Language Day, a holiday dedicated by UNESCO in honor of Bangla activists who in 1952 died to get their language recognized with official status. Would you die for your language? They did. So now, Rising Voices and Global Voices lead a global social media campaign to celebrate linguistic diversity and tweet in your mother language. And UT Arlington's Native American Languages Lab was partner on that project. And so we were very happy to be tweeting and retweeting all the languages of the world, including Yuchi, just down the street, Cherokee, just down the road, and Chickasaw on that day, as well as Gaelic. Native languages matter. Indigenous languages matter. And what we see is that tribes in the United States, our languages, which are spoken nowhere else other than in the United States, are having efforts where they're trying to support that language and see that those languages survive into the next millennium. Jessie Little-Dobert is a Wampanoag woman. The Wampanoag language had not been spoken for 150 years. They're the tribe that celebrated that mythical first Thanksgiving with the Pilgrim Indians. Perhaps you've heard of it. In the years after that contact, that first contact, what you saw was a tremendous literature being written in the Wampanoag language. The Bible, yes, but also lots of documents, deeds, wills, diaries, all kinds of materials were written. And in fact, it may be the largest corpus of written documents in any Native American language. The language fell dormant. And one day, Jessie had dreams that her ancestors were speaking, visions that her ancestors were speaking to her, and it was the language. And Jessie went and got a master's in linguistics and studied these documents and related languages. And she breathed new life into her language. She learned the language, she teaches the language, and she used the language in the home. And her little girl is the first native speaker of Wampanoag in 150 years. The human spirit craves that connection to ancestors, but the human spirit also has great hope for the future. And heritage languages allow us to transcend the past and the future and to make sure that heritage, that future, that connection to ancestor is always there. Thank you.